Before we get into it, are the releases for these games set in stone? No. We are in an age where companies keep their games in early access for it seems like a decade because they would rather see the game die before it actually releases. Now, with that being said, you may have heard of some of these games already, because even I have covered one of these games on a very similar list in the past. But do I know if it will release this year or even next year? No, I do not, but I do have hope for it. The decade has begun in what seems like shambles. It might just be one of the worst starts to a decade ever, but that's not stopping these game companies because they're going to continue to push for development, and that is why we're going to explore 10 MMOs that will hopefully release in 2020. Some of these games are looking to push what we have seen in an MMO, and some are looking to fit themselves within a specific niche part of the gaming world. Over the past couple of years, a lot of the most anticipated MMOs have continued to be anticipated or possibly maybe kinda even forgotten at this point. So hopefully these MMOs can make do with their promises and we'll see a release sooner than later. With all that being said, why don't we start it off with the game that seems to be getting the most hype at the moment is New World. That is being developed and published by Amazon's gaming studio. The game is an action combat, classless, PvP or PvE or PvPvE. Are you sure this is right? Focused MMO. Originally the game focused heavily on open world PvP. Then they went ahead and changed directions to have toggle on and off open world PvP. But it got quite a bit of backlash, so we'll see where they end up going with for the PvP. As far as classes go, well, nada. The game has a classes system where you will rank up core stats as a way to progress your character, as they want the player to not feel limited when they're choosing a specific character even before they hop into the world. The combat seems like the game's best selling point, which I'm sure says a lot. It has been said that the combat has drawn a large influence to Dark Souls, and from what we have seen in gameplay videos, it does look pretty good, just not sure how fluid it will look on live servers. If it does turn out to be smooth with the open world PvP, then it could be quite fulfilling killing enemies. The PvP also focuses itself on sieges, which we have seen in other games before like Warhammer Online and Guild Wars 2 for example. So those who enjoy taking over some castles and some forts will probably enjoy the dynamic of that in this game. Now recently, due to the quarantine, the studio has had some issues with development because game design does require a lot of communication, and being away from the office and other works does presume quite some issues with that, so the game has been delayed until August 25th, 2020 for release. Starbase is probably the most unique MMO we have on this list. It is more of a simulation-esque MMO where, as a player in outer space, you can build and design spaceships, stations, and different types of devices, with each piece of those builds being an integral part because each small detail will matter to the overall build and development of whatever you're making. The world is also fully destructible, so if you put hours and hours into building, that spaceship can be destroyed minutes later after setting off to explore for resources or something like that. Where other MMOs limit the creative freedom of your character within their worlds and their environments, Starbase is looking to allow for people to explore its universe, to collect materials, resources, mine on asteroids, and team up with other people to try and take down larger spaceships or stations in order to set their dominance within the game. The game is more focused on building and exploring than a linear quest system that you have to grind to get to max level with and then do dungeons and raids and endgame PvP. There are two different factions, so open world PvP is the name of the game, where you team up with others in order to mine and collect materials that will be used for creating and upgrading ships. It looks different, and hopefully they are still set to release in 2020. Ashes of Creation was announced a couple of years back, and after the studio behind the game, Intrepid Studios, shifted their assets and resources to trying to push a battle royale, they received some backlash from the community for doing so. Also, it didn't help them financially by doing that, which we have seen in the past with Warhammer Online doing it, as well as Camelot Unchained did it pretty recently. Nonetheless, they have been pretty open with their development, and as to what testers have been showing off, it looks like good progress is being made. The game's core is based on the world's nodes that you'll find throughout the game. Each one is open for players to help level up as well as take control of. As these nodes level up from 1 to 2 and 2 to 3, the benefits will increase, such as the quests changing, offering different chain quests and public quests, as well as physically growing to where eventually you can have a city being built around certain nodes. What makes this also quite interesting is different servers can have cities being placed in different locations throughout the world. Each server will be independent of how nodes will grow. The way the nodes grow is by players killing mobs, finishing quests, and gathering within the node's specific locations. All of this does mean that politics will be a major part of the game, as players can overtake the different nodes. As the cities are being built from these nodes, the players will be able to siege them to try and overtake them. So similar to how New World will have sieges, this game will also have them. They're saying they're looking to have hundreds of people to be involved in these sieges, so hopefully their engine can actually uphold that entire popularity, while possibly some other sieges are going on simultaneously elsewhere. The game has a large focus on open world PvP and trying to conquer the nodes throughout its environment, which actually presents a pretty interesting dynamic for open world PvP. And as far as release date goes, we are unaware of one right now, but we do know that the game is making its progress, so stay tuned for that. Crimson Desert has a lot of questions to be answered because not much is known about the game right now. Pearl Abyss, who also developed Black Desert, as you can see they're clearly very original with how they name their games, has said that the focus is on a single player campaign of a character called Macduff. Well, you're probably asking, single player? So how is this an MMO? Well, they also said that the game will have dungeons and raids, much like most other MMOs, which is a cooperative experience, so we don't really know where they're trying to head with this one. With the success of Black Desert being a mainly PvP MMO, I'm sure Pearl Abyss wanted to tap into the PvE side, but it's going to be interesting to see how a game with a single player campaign will play into an MMO. The beauty of an MMO is the immersive experience of seeing and playing with other people whenever you choose to. They said they are going to announce more at E3 this year, but given what is going on with the quarantine, we'll see what happens with E3 and actually what happens with the development of Crimson Desert. Lost Ark is the MMO that I'm sure almost all of you have heard of at this point. Now, the game was released in late 2018 in Korea and later in Russia, but not yet in the West. The West has been waiting years and years for Lost Ark to even get a closed beta, because the game offers a ton and has a certain type of polish that other MMOs might not have. There has been news that as of recently, the studio is finally gearing up to try and releasing the game sooner than later with a beta this year. The game is similar to Diablo and Path of Exile, but with a more focus on MMO-centered gameplay, such as dungeons, world bosses, raids, and arenas. The storylines are well thought out. They recently removed gender locking on classes, introduced a new class, more content updates, and so much more since the release of the Korean version. The combat looks to be fluid with amazing animations, and when taking down mobs, the physicality actually feels impactful. Lost Ark has a ton of content to offer for MMO fans, and I think it's why we want it so badly. Lost Ark fans are waiting for pretty much any new news, even an announcement of when they will release the game. That is how much anticipation the game in the West has garnered at this point. Some of you may be familiar with the MMO that was called Ascent Infinite Realm, or AIR for short, which you can tell is actually part of this title, and that is because the studio has gone and revamped the game with its core mechanics, as well as changing the name slightly. Previously, the game focused highly around the game's aerial combat with ships and a pretty kinda clunky tab targeting system, but with Elyon, they're reducing the focus on aerial combat as far as mechanics to fighting goes, as well as introducing the same action combat system that Terra utilizes. The uniqueness to AIR was actually the aerial combat. They did say that the aerial combat will remain a part of combat, just slightly less important, as well as the aerial mounts can be used for certain events and activities. The game's endgame content, now if it's similar to Ascent Infinite Realms, will have realm versus realm battles, as well as small scale arenas, and for PvE, it will have dungeons that can be done solo or with a group, because the scaling of difficulty is the same with solo or 2, 3, or 4 people. The game does not have a release date yet, but stay tuned for more in the near future. From developer Cryptic Studios and publisher Perfect World Games, Magic Legends is a cross-platform MMO based in the Magic universe. A match made in heaven when you put it on paper. The free-to-play MMO is said to currently have 5 classes, each having specific ability upgrades, class perks, and a class trait that you can choose from. Now, if you have played Skyforge before, you know that you can start out playing a certain class, but as you play more and progress, you'll unlock other classes that you can switch out with. Magic Legends sort of has a similar system when it comes to their class system. When you unlock unlock new classes, you can then go ahead and start a new class, and you can use the spells and abilities that you have unlocked with your previously leveled characters or character as a way to mix and match for a somewhat unique class. The game's core mechanic seems to be how it implements cards and a deck into the combat. The cards are going to be a player's spells and abilities, and each player can have a deck of 12 cards. As the player uses the cards during combat, they will be substituted for another card, so the plan is that the combat stays dynamic and not always planned. As we don't know a whole lot about the game yet, we aren't sure how fluid and smooth it will be. As far as content, we know that there is a campaign of sorts, which will probably be similar to Diablo or Path of Exile, as well as some small scale PvP. Phantasy Star Online 2 has actually been out since 2012 in the East, but like Lost Ark, we have yet to receive it in the Western market, and has in fact released on Xbox One already. Nah, I don't want to hear anyone coming at me and saying, oh, the game is already out, so this list is fake news. Well, the PC version for the NA region is teased to be released in late May of this year, so it's not actually out yet for most of the players who are going to play the game. The game has 4 different races and 9 different classes to choose from. The game's combat is pretty much one of its larger highlights, as you can switch out from different weapons as a way to balance a somewhat unique style, so you can start out with a bow and follow it up with a katana to tackle the enemies within melee range. When it comes to questing and progressing your character, there is a story to follow, which we are unsure if every so-called episode will be released or if they're going to release them over time as they did with the Eastern version. Similarly to Neverwinter or Guild Wars 1, the game has a hub where you can accept your quests, do your professions and such, and then you can venture out into a zoned area which can be mostly soloed by the player, aside from some certain dungeons or quests that will require larger groups. Now, the game is mainly focused on PvE with its dungeons and raids, but the Japanese version got an update with 6 vs 6 arena battles back in 2017. I'm pretty sure if the NA version doesn't launch with it, that it will come shortly after as a future update. Corepunk looks to be a polished and promising top-down MMO, similar to the likes of Lost Ark or Albion Online. Its art style seems to be this blend of cyberpunk with dark fantasy and its soft style of graphics. So far, there are going to be 12 classes to choose from, with each having 3 different mastery trees to distribute points into that will determine your character's playstyle. For example, the champion, which I presume is seen as the more tank role, can go into a tree for 2-handed swords, one with sword and board, and one that can be an archer with a bow. Corepunk looks to deliver their questing system quite differently for an MMO, as the player can choose different outcomes to quests, which will end up delivering a different ending to the story, or so they say. Now, it sounds great on paper, but I feel like we have heard this before, so we'll see how it actually turns out. The game will have randomly generated dungeons, raids at endgame, crafting and gathering professions, as well as PvP in the forms of 1v1, 2v2, and 3v3 arenas, as well as some guild wars. Also, one of the big aspects that they're showing off is this fog of war, so that when it comes to player versus player, you have to brace for fight at all times, because you won't know what's coming until that player or whatever is in front of you is getting closer and closer to you, and then it opens up. The developers have said they're shooting for a beta in the last quarter of this year, so we will see what happens in the coming months. First off, the game's art style is amazing, and I don't really like anime-influenced graphics. It is a semi-open world MMO, kind of similar to Terra or Ion, where you'll be getting loading screens when you enter into other zones. The cities are large, and they're pretty impressive with their small details, and the zones are actually likewise. Right now, there are 4 classes, with the game having a combat system similar to Black Desert, where the cooldowns are short, but from videos it actually looks to seem that the combat's smoother than Black Desert's, and it's not even in beta yet. So far, we do know that there will be dungeons where the bosses go through phases similar to how raids at endgames and other MMOs go, where each phase the boss will spawn different mobs or become stronger and add some skills into his arsenal to try and take you down. This is actually quite nice, because a lot of MMOs will throw easy dungeons at players while they level up, just as in kind of like an extra thing to do rather than a challenge to let the player feel some sort of accomplishment as they grind their way to endgame. As far as PvP goes, we still don't know much, so I'm sure we'll find out more about it pretty soon. All in all, the game has a beautiful look to it, and even right now the game looks to run smooth during their tests. So hopefully they can continue the test and we can get some more information about the late and the end game content. Alright, so there you go, there we have it. Those are the top 10 MMOs that we're looking at. I was going to do some honorable mentions as well, but I figured, I think we'll keep that for the future. These games are kind of iffy on the real release date. I know some of these are iffy. The ones I have for honorable mention were probably some years down the road. So nonetheless, hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Here we have a pretty good mix of MMOs, whether you're looking forward to the future MMOs or not. Hopefully you guys just enjoy the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up, share it. Personally, I'm really excited for the future of Blue Protocol and Corepunk, but I'm going to be keeping an eye on all these games. Subscribe for more content on these games in the future. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I might do some giveaways and some stuff in the future, but shh, don't tell anyone. Everyone else, just stay safe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.